You've always been told whole grains are the heart-healthy choice, right? But after 60, some of the most common ones can secretly spike your blood sugar, inflame your joints, and even drain your energy without you realizing it. Doctors rarely warn about this, yet studies show the wrong grains can quietly age your heart, brain, and gut. Stay with me. Number 2 shocks most seniors. Even Dr. Andrew Weil, a voice of reason in modern medicine, has echoed this truth. Not all whole grains are created equal, he warns. Some, especially for older adults, can fuel chronic inflammation and push the body toward insulin resistance, that silent spiral that drains energy and fogs the mind. But here's the good news. What ages the body can also be replaced with what supports it, and the change doesn't need to be extreme. It just needs to be conscious. In this video, we're going to uncover 5 grains that may be silently harming your health after 60. They're common, often marketed as heart-healthy or wholesome, but for many older bodies they act like slow poison, fueling fatigue, joint pain, and digestive discomfort. But this is not a list to scare you. It's a guide to freedom. Because for every grain that hurts, there's a wiser one that heals. For every habit that drains, there's another that nourishes. You'll discover the better choices, the alternatives that can bring back your clarity, ease your digestion, and soothe your joints. Because the truth is, aging doesn't have to feel like a steady decline. Not when you understand what your body is asking for. Not when you stop feeding it sand and start feeding it strength. The grain that pretends to be healthy, but ages your gut. It begins with something as simple as a slice of toast in the morning, a warm bowl of cereal, the familiar comfort of a sandwich at lunch. These foods feel harmless, even helpful, especially when they carry words like whole grain, fiber-rich, or fortified. For many years, they've been presented as the healthier choice. And for those of us watching our sugar, our cholesterol, or just trying to do the right thing for an aging body, they've been easy to trust, but here's the hidden truth. Many of these wheat-based breads and cereals, even those labeled as whole grain, are far from the real thing. What's sold in most packages today is not the wheat your grandparents baked with. It's a modern crop bred for yield, not gentleness, stripped of its ancient fiber structure, processed, preserved, and packed with additives that mimic health while robbing your digestion of peace. And what you're left with is a product that fills the stomach but leaves the body inflamed, tired, and bloated. Modern wheat, unlike its ancient cousins like einkorn or emmer, carries higher levels of gluten and lectins, proteins that can irritate the delicate lining of the gut. After 60, that lining becomes more vulnerable. It doesn't recover as easily. So even when you think you're eating well, your body might be fighting silently. You may notice it in small ways. A feeling of pressure after meals, unpredictable bowel movements, or even pain in the joints that seems to come from nowhere. And then there's the fatigue, that sudden heaviness that comes an hour after eating. The feeling of needing to lie down, not because you've worked too hard, but because your body is spending all its strength just trying to make peace with what you fed it. For many older adults, this isn't coincidence. It's a quiet intolerance, one that builds over time, one that steals energy without ever raising alarm. But a shift is possible. One that doesn't require giving up bread entirely, but choosing differently. Sprouted grains, for example, are easier on the gut. They've already begun the digestion process before they reach your plate. And ancient grains like einkorn, though not as common, can be a return to what once worked. They're softer on the system, richer in true fiber, and free from the hybridization that has turned so many modern wheat products into irritants. There's a story of a 69-year-old seamstress, her hands stiff from years of stitching, her mornings filled with discomfort. She didn't expect much from changing bread, but after switching to sprouted grains and easing away from the processed loaves, her pain began to fade. It didn't vanish overnight, but one morning as she reached for her teacup, she noticed her fingers didn't resist, and she smiled, because digestion speaks in silence, and when the gut begins to heal, the whole body follows. As the saying goes, bread that bloats is bread that breaks you, and in the quiet discomfort of your stomach may lie the first warning that something deeper needs your attention. You don't need to fear food, but it's time to see it clearly. Not all grains nourish, not all comfort is real comfort. Some things feel like home, but they hollow us slowly. And sometimes healing begins not with a grand decision, but with one different slice on your plate. The rice mistake that spikes inflammation after 60. There's a kind of comfort that only a bowl of rice can bring, soft, warm, familiar. It's a food that has fed generations, filled plates in humble kitchens, and carried memories in every grain. For many, it's more than food, it's tradition, a symbol of care, a habit passed down without question. But for the aging body, especially one that moves less, digests slower, and holds more silence than it once did, even rice can become a quiet source of harm. White rice is often praised for its simplicity, easy to chew, easy to cook, gentle on the stomach. But it's also stripped, emptied of fiber, quick to turn into sugar, especially in a body that no longer processes glucose with the same ease. After 60, muscle mass tends to decline. The metabolism slows. The sugar that once fed movement now settles in soft places, around the belly, behind the knees, inside the blood vessels. One bowl, then another. A lifetime of trust, now challenged by new needs. Even brown rice, often seen as the wiser cousin, carries its own burdens. Unless prepared properly, it holds phytic acid, a substance that binds to minerals and makes them harder to absorb. And there's arsenic, a trace element that builds up in certain rice fields and can quietly strain aging kidneys. For someone with a body that's already doing its best, that's one burden too many. But rice doesn't have to become the enemy. In some traditions, especially in Okinawa, rice is never eaten alone. It's softened by lentils, balanced by fermented vegetables, and portioned with care. In these combinations, the grain becomes part of something more complete, less of a spike, more of a support. It's not what we eat, but how we welcome it into the body that matters. A retired couple once shared their quiet change. For years, they'd eaten rice with every dinner. The wife had swelling in her ankles. The husband moved slower each morning. They didn't expect miracles, but they began using millet instead, a humble grain, rich in minerals, lighter on the system. 3 weeks later, her slippers slid on without effort. His steps, while still measured, had new rhythm. Sometimes the shift is that gentle, not dramatic, just less struggle, and maybe that's the point. Rice doesn't have to be removed, but it must be respected. Like an old song, beautiful when played at the right time, in the right key, with the right instruments surrounding it. Alone, it may cause dissonance, but within harmony, it still has a place. So many of our aches come not from sudden wounds, but from years of imbalance, from habits that once healed but no longer serve, from traditions that need a little adjusting, not abandoning. What nourished you once may now need a companion, or a gentler version of itself. And isn't that true for many things in life? With age comes the wisdom to keep the melody, but change the notes. The grain that feeds, sugar crashes, and brain fog. It often begins around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. The mind starts to slow. You forget where you left your glasses. The sentence you were forming trails off into silence. You reach for a snack, something quick, light, comforting. A corn cracker, a handful of popcorn, maybe a soft tortilla from last night's meal. It feels harmless, a small pleasure in the middle of a quiet day. But what if that very snack is quietly feeding the fog in your mind? Corn is everywhere, not just in the kernels we see, but hidden in flours, cereals, snacks, and processed foods labeled light or easy to digest. For older adults, these foods are often presented as safe, gentle on the teeth, quick to chew, easy to prepare. But few talk about what happens after, the way corn converts rapidly to sugar, the way it enters the bloodstream with speed, then drops just as fast, leaving behind that hollow feeling. The drop in energy, the sudden irritability, the confusion that feels deeper than simple tiredness. After 60, the brain asks for steady fuel. It doesn't want fireworks. It wants a candle that burns slowly, consistently, without flickering out. But corn, especially when processed into flakes, meal, or chips, behaves more like dry paper. It flares up, burns fast, and leaves nothing behind. That sugar rush might feel like a lift at first, but it rarely lasts. And when the mind is already navigating memory changes, sleep challenges, and a slower processing speed, this kind of instability can feel like walking across thin ice. There are better grains, ones that offer warmth without the crash. Buckwheat, for example, despite its name, contains no wheat at all. It's rich in plant compounds that support blood flow to the brain. Sorghum, an ancient grain, digests slowly and supports steady energy. These are the grains that act more like guardians, quietly holding your hand through the long afternoons. A caregiver once noticed something subtle. The man she looked after, 75 years old, used to get confused around dusk. He'd forget what day it was, forget whether he'd eaten. They assumed it was age. But after a few weeks of adjusting his meals, less corn, more legumes and slow-digesting grains, something shifted. He still had quiet moments, but the fog began to lift. He smiled more, remembered her name, looked out the window and noticed the birds again. Corn feeds machines, not minds. It's a phrase worth remembering, because what powers a tractor doesn't always power a soul. The older brain doesn't want speed. It wants rhythm, stability, nourishment that doesn't come at a cost. The truth is, not every grain deserves a place at your table, especially the ones that stir up more than they settle. The body, after decades of work, deserves peace. The mind, after carrying so many memories, deserves clarity. And sometimes that begins with a different grain in your hand and a steadier light in your day. Grains that heal. What to eat instead for longevity and energy. There's something deeply comforting about a warm bowl held between your hands, steam rising slowly, the scent of something familiar, earthy, gentle, not rushed, not heavy, just right. In many parts of the world, villages in Japan, valleys in Peru, quiet corners of India, people have long understood that grains are not the enemy, but they must be respected, prepared with care, chosen with wisdom, and when they are, they become more than food. They become medicine. Among the grains that nourish rather than inflame, oats hold a special place when chosen with intention. Organic gluten-free oats can offer gentle fiber, soothe digestion, and support steady blood sugar. They don't rush the body. They meet it where it is. Amaranth, small and ancient, brings protein and minerals to the plate. Quinoa, long used in the Andes, is light yet sustaining. These grains support muscle, especially in a time of life when muscle often fades. They calm the gut, offer steady energy, and don't leave behind the burden of heaviness or inflammation. But it's not just the grain, it's the ritual. In traditional kitchens, grains were never rushed. They were soaked, sometimes overnight. This quiet act of letting something rest before it feeds you makes all the difference. Soaking breaks down the natural defenses of the grain, makes it easier to digest, gentler on the kidneys, softer on the stomach. It's a ritual of respect, a message to the body. I care for what I give you. In blue zone cultures, those rare places where people often live past 90 with strength and clarity, grains are part of the evening meal, but not in the form of toast or cereal. Instead, they appear as soft porridge, soups or stews, warm, slow, healing, a bowl that cools the fire of the day, that prepares the body for sleep, that doesn't demand digestion, but invites it. It's not just what's eaten, but when and how. Imagine a simple plate, half filled with vegetables, steamed, roasted, or gently sautéed. A portion of grain like millet or barley, softly cooked and seasoned with herbs. A bit of protein, an egg, a lentil stew, a spoon of cottage cheese. This is not a diet. It's a comfort, a plate that doesn't rush, a plate made for hands that have worked many years, for mouths that now seek simplicity, for hearts that have seen both joy and sorrow, and sometimes change begins with a quiet morning. In Japan, one elder spoke of how her knees used to crack when she stood. Nothing dramatic, just a reminder of the years. But one winter she began her days not with toast, but with a bowl of warm barley porridge, seasoned with miso, touched with scallions. After some weeks she noticed the sounds had faded. She rose more gently. Her breath was deeper. The food, she said, felt like it loved me back. And perhaps that's what we forget. That food isn't just fuel, it's relationship. Some grains take from us, others give. The ones that heal don't shout, they whisper. They settle quietly in the stomach, they travel gently through the blood. They ask nothing but time and offer resilience in return. It's never too late to receive that gift. Not when the next bowl can hold not only warmth, but a future your body still remembers how to grow into. Grains can be medicine or poison, depending on the mouth that eats them. There are aches that become so familiar, we stop questioning them. The slow rise from a chair, the discomfort after a meal, the tiredness that lingers even after a full night's sleep. For many, these sensations are quietly filed away under the name old age. But not all of it is aging. Some of it is inflammation. Some of it is imbalance. Some of it comes from the very grains we've trusted most. Our digestion, in the later decades of life, speaks more softly, but no less urgently. It resists the weight of what once felt normal, and when we dismiss the bloating, the gas, the fog, we miss the chance to listen, to notice that our body may not be tired, it may simply be reacting. Dr. Shigeaki Hinohara, who lived over a century with humility and clarity, once said, "We are not what we eat, but what we digest." And digestion, especially in older years, begins with choosing grains that nourish instead of aggravate, grains that soothe rather than spark. Dr. Andrew Weil, whose work bridges the wisdom of tradition and the proof of science, reminds us that the future of aging isn't about less food, it's about less inflammation. And that shift begins not with pills or diets, but with simple decisions on the plate. Because what inflames the gut inflames the joints. What inflames the joints dims the energy. And what dims the energy clouds the will to keep living fully. But here's the grace of it all. Not everything must be removed. Not every grain is the enemy. It is not a war, it's a relationship. And like all relationships in the later years, it asks for honesty, care, and a little adjustment. Some grains will no longer walk beside you. Others, long forgotten, may return as quiet allies. You don't need to give up bread or rice or warmth. You only need to ask, is this food walking with me or pulling me back? At 80, the body is not a machine in decline. It is a garden. One that remembers every season, every storm, every harvest. And like any garden, it blooms or withers depending on what we feed it. Not just with nutrients, but with intention. A grain that heals is like water to the roots. A grain that harms is like sun without shade. Too much, too harsh, too fast. So tonight, perhaps you'll open your pantry. You'll see the packages, the labels, the bags that have lived there quietly for years. Some will be familiar, some will be trusted. But one by one, they may start to look different. Not because they changed, but because you did. Because knowledge, once received, becomes a kind of vision. And once you see differently, you feed yourself differently. This is not about fear, it is about freedom. It is about choosing the next 10 years with care, about waking with more clarity, walking with more ease, digesting with more peace, not by changing everything, but by changing what needed changing all along. And sometimes it begins with a question. Are these grains feeding your strength or stealing it quietly? The answer is already inside you. It always has been.